YouTube is a little longer than some of the other YouTubes so far because it's meant to be a companion to the brochure that's referenced in the description section that you can then get that brochure. And the reason is that it's about Harari's book, 21 Lessons for the 21st Century. And the brochure is meant to be a workbook that as you read, you can start to identify policies that he's identified in there. But one of the reasons why Harari uses the word lessons is he says that what he wants to do is stimulate further thinking and help readers participate in the major conversations of our times. So what should we be looking for as we read through 21 Lessons? And we should be looking for things that are policies. And we'll give an example of that very later on. But the idea behind policies is, though, that they are basically tied back to values, or should be. So the policy of democracy, of one vote for every people, is tied back to the idea that we want to maximize the number of people that have a say in their own history. And that's why divine right had to fall. Now, the other thing is that we have to look at policies and see if they do that. So if you look at the Electoral College in the USA, it really doesn't maximize the numbers. So it's a bad policy and should actually be just gotten rid of. But anyway, the reason that's important is because the institutions that we have are built upon the policies, and the policies work their way back to the values. So the values are worked their way forward again into the institutions also. So the other thing that Harari kind of warns us about in the first sentence in his chapter on disillusionment, which is the first chapter, is that humans think in stories. And so we have to be careful that rather than facts and numbers or equations, right? And that the simpler the story, the better. So we basically have to worry about the fact that we can rationally come up with the greatest arguments, but we have to be careful about the fact that most humans think in stories. And so we have to work those rational arguments into the stories themselves. This is when you look at 21 Lessons for the 21st Century, those stories, if you think about it, I mean, the things that we believe in are tied into our fairy tales, they're tied into the books that we read, the art, they're tied into our music, they're tied into our movies, they're tied into our games. All of our values come from that. So he says, let's look at three major values. At least I extracted three major values from the book. One is that we have to reduce brutality and suffering, like to the planet itself. And he talks often about the negatives of climate change, all right? We also have to, other non-human species, all right? Anything that's conscious, he says, that can feel suffering, we should care about. Others that are not us, and he talks about how fascism and authoritarianism lead us to a negative on that. And then in our own world, right, or let's say the USA, equality, and also caring about the fact that people are becoming superfluous. That's his first one. Now, the second one that he has is its second value is to welcome disruptive technologies. This is important, okay? Because if you take something, say, where we say that we have to tolerate, manage, or control, this is Derrida's thing about tolerate, and he says that basically we had to do that for the atomic bomb, but for things like these new disruptive technologies, we really have to partner with them. So with Google DeepMind, with Watson, and with some of the efforts that are going on in bioengineering, we really have to learn how to partner. And partner means we have to learn how to work with them, not to control them. The other thing is he talks about advantaging objective reality. We have to even though we think in stories, we have to be careful because the fact that we prefer stories doesn't mean that that's the only thing the stories have to be passionate, and B, that we can't advantage facts. And C, he says we have to move to where we advantage facts. And we're not just changing the stories, but changing the stories to advantage facts. And so this is basically, he's saying we got to start to think outside the box. All right. And this is important because he says, it's very difficult for people to become acultural or ahistorical, for us to walk out of a river of our culture and our history. But in our case, we have to basically toss aside, if you will, romanticism, capitalism, humanism, nationalism, consumerism, the idea that we need variety and scientism as a given. And he addresses a lot of those in the book Sapiens and in the book Homo Deus. And so the inside of the brochure, he basically has 24 concepts that I've identified 24 concepts that I've extracted from Sapiens and Homo Deus that will be a kind of a help to us as we try and read through 21 Lessons and build our policies. They basically become the foundation for it, all right? So the foundation for the policies that we're going to extract from the 21 Lessons, and we'll build our policy worksheet at the end. And let's start with the first one that I think he talks about is cognitive behaviors. And he says research indicates that Homo sapiens are not slaves to natural selection. And while there are some preferences that we inherit with our DNA, these are not behavioral imperatives. All right? So why is this important? This is important because this means advantaging rational decisions is a possible future behavior because we're not tied into that. Then he talks about the fact that the speed to the top. We got to the top of the food chain too quickly in evolutionary terms. And rather than becoming majestic stewards of the planet, we are still dangerous and cruel. Along with that, the other species on the planet have not had proper time to adjust to our dominance, and we are driving many of them extinct. Again, why is this important? Is because we will need to actually develop a partnership concept with the technologies and create stories about that partnership itself. The value of myths is a big point of Harari's thought, and he talks that myth is the secret sauce of our ascendancy to the top of the food chain. It basically is our ability to cooperate on a mass scale. This cooperation is enabled by our cognitive ability to establish and believe myths. So we may need new methods of cooperation that blend our rational worldview with some justification for the large mass of sapiens that are already on the planet. That's why that is important. Right? Then we look at the issue of agriculture and elites. And the agricultural revolution some 10,000 years ago enabled the development of elites. Therefore, it is rather new in evolutionary terms. Elites are rather new, and is not a DNA species imperative. Also, the agricultural revolution was not really about sapiens' happiness, but rather the increase in population. And why this is important is that history is not the story of sapiens' happiness, and elites are not a necessary condition for sapiens' culture. The next thing he talks about is artifacts prisoners, that the ability to be mobile became much more difficult as sapiens started to collect so many artifacts that anchored them. Right? This necessitated the development of the transportation industry. The reason that is important is that the relationship between artifacts, status, capital, and work will be substantially altered with the technologies, and modern mobility technologies are not bound to our current transportation and artifact world. Specialization, when he talks about that, specialization is advantaged the need for money, common denominator for trade, intelligence over consciousness, and the idea of hierarchy, top-down decision-making, and who is in charge. All of these were sourced from specialization. And why is that important? Is that if intelligence can be decoupled from consciousness, then decisions associated with sapiens may not need emotions. All right? Artificial intelligence world may not need money. These are very important issues, all right? Then he talks about the need for the masses. And we need basically the three major institutions, the economic, political, and social, may not need large populations anymore. Robotics will replace the skills work, and artificial intelligence will replace the knowledge work. Large populations are becoming superfluous. Why is this important? Is that there's no historical guarantee that if the masses become useless, that the institutions will actually protect them. Right? Then he talks about universal myths. The three major myths that are universal are empire, which in our case is democracy, and it's a way to manage mass cooperation. Money, which is capitalism, which is a way to manage the specialization. And religion, which is humanism, which is a way to manage sapiens' phenomenological experiences. These are our current universal myths that are, and why is that important? Because the universal myths might go away, right? And we need to prepare sapiens for this potentiality. Just think about that, all right? Then the other thing he talks about is the myths do have dark side. Like capitalism has a dark side as it facilitates greed and inequality. Democracy has a dark side as it tends to limit peak performances. And humanism has a dark side as it adopted the monotheistic prejudice for hierarchy without responsibility. So the dark sides exist. And why is that important? Is that the dark side of all myths is almost exclusively associated with our passions, all right, and not our rationality. Then he talks about utility, not truth, right? The idea that knowledge is based on what works for us and not on what is objectively true. So we've built a world that way, all right? And so the reason that's important is as we continue to part with technologies, we might find that technology suggests changes that we can not even understand or appreciate. And we may have to go with it, even though we don't understand it or appreciate it. The next thing he talks about is sapiens exceptionalism. And the Industrial Revolution, along with the dominant monotheistic religions, have encouraged sapiens to ignore the planet, ignore other species on the planet, and even ignore some of their own peoples and treat them as their inferiors. The reason this is important is that partnerships with technology will require some humility to succeed. Otherwise, it'll start treating us that way. The other thing is the three possibilities that he talks about for the future are bioengineering, which we have super babies, transhumanism, which we're half tech and half sapiens, and non-organic intelligence, which basically is intelligence with its own mission. These are the three possibilities that he's built. And the reason that that's important is that these are all complex systems. And complexity brings with it emergence and unpredictability, which right now we have no methodology designed to deal with complexity. We will need a technology methodology similar to the scientific methodology from the Industrial Revolution. These technologies also might be in conflict, which is a big challenge. Then he talks about the fact that we talk about common culture, he basically said, despite the current emphasis on cultural differences, we are really in agreement on most of the major issues. A nice example he gives is E equals MC squared is true in all cultures. But the major problems today are global, and local solutions will not be sufficient. So we have to, common culture is actually an advantage for us. Then he talks about replacement. He said, this is interesting, I think, because in the 20th century, in a very short period of time, the market and the state replaced the family and the community as the provider of essential services. Think about that, right? And the ramifications of that, or why that is important, is technology may soon replace work, the market, and the state. And we have to prepare for this possibility, all right? And then talks about intersubjective realities. And he says sapiens is the only species that uses intersubjective realities to manage their existence. All right, and so why is this important? Is that they like Santa Claus, as intersubjective realities get exposed, they lose their power, and we may need to come up with alternatives to manage our future existence. Then he taught algorithms, right? Algorithms, all the sapiens decisions are solved using algorithms, right? Our survival problems and our reproduction problems, everything that has made us to where we are has been because of that. And then inorganic material is becoming better than organic sapiens at making decisions. That's why that's important, all right? Brain research, we are uncovering unusual facts about how we make decisions. And many of the facts are not in sync with how we have designed our worldview. All right, so the narrating self and the fact that the peak end rule, these things are basically changing things for us. So now we have to relinquishing the decisions. Inorganic technology is very unnerving for us because of the way our brain works. Then he talks about decoupling. Okay, he talks about consciousness. Consciousness, he gives it two different definitions. One is subjective experience, and the other is ability to suffer. We are in the process of decoupling intelligence and consciousness. And consciousness is still a little difficult to define, but he uses the words subjective experience or the ability to suffer. And that's the ability to suffer relates to a lot of the other species. So we have to see if consciousness is necessary for intelligence, or will it become, like our appendix, a useless remnant of our evolutionary past. Maybe consciousness will go the way of the appendix. Then he talks about the fact that we have no free will. He says scientific research is leaning towards the idea that free will does not exist. All decisions sourced from electrochemical processes in the brain or random subatomic accidents. The reason, of course, that this is important is that we will have to redesign our current universal myths, and we cannot just tweak them, right? Because they're based upon the concept of free will. The idea that sapiens have made the world a single ecological unit as they have spread to every corner of the planet has made it so that so many of our issues are global. We have to deal with global issues because we are basically all over the whole planet. So ecological decisions need global agreements. Then he talks about the fact that tech knows best. Technology can make better decisions for most of us. Think of like the GPS systems. We are continuing to depend on technology for decisions that are being made and decisions that we use on an everyday basis in our life. And why is this important? Okay, is that in order for technology to be effective, it needs access to big data, which includes data that we today consider very private. Right? And in the wrong hands, this technology can seriously create authoritarian monsters. Then, too much data. This is where he says, in order for us to make informed decisions, we need correct data and information. Currently, there is more data than sapiens are capable of dealing with, so we need technology to help us. We can't basically get into the information, knowledge, and wisdom without technology. So like GPS systems, sapiens will become more and more reliant on technology's decision-making in all spheres of our existence. Then the techno-humanism caution that he put is the ability of the elite to get their collective hands on the newer technologies first may empower them to create unresolvable gaps between the elites and everyone else. They may create the elite arc, and which he is very concerned about. So it will be necessary to create anarchistic practices for the dissemination and use of the technologies. It is hard to imagine a techno-humanism solution that does not power the elites and abuse the masses. And then the last item that we have is complexity challenge. And this is, I've added, he talks about level 1 and level 2 complexity, but complex systems are currently outside the realms of sapiens intelligence and therefore require some partnership with technology. We have to partner with technology. And the reason this is important is because complex systems are managed by observing the outcome and reacting to those outcomes, a practice that we as sapiens we're just ill-equipped for. The next area that we then go to in the brochure is the decisions and policies made by, we have to look at what decisions and policies should be made by technology. And why can't all of the last 2 layers of Maslow's thing be made by the technologies? That's my question. So when we look at our way reading through the book, if we get to even the beginning where we're just looking at we come up with a policy of adapt and improve liberal democracy's current institutions, and we say that, okay, that basically, affects welcoming the technology, advantaging the objective, and it's something that we have to do right now. And so the goal here is to basically go through all of and I'm not going to do this in this YouTube, but to go through the whole book and to basically identify what we think are policies and see when we think they should happen now, 10 years, 20 years from now. Do they stand behind the values and support the values? Thank you.